The inauguration of the 47th U.S. President Donald Trump will take place on January 20th, 2025, with Senator J.D. Vance as Vice President. Joe Biden will remain president until then. It seems to me that Ukraine is now almost on a tightrope, as we need to maintain good relations with one party that will complete its term in 2 months, and have time to take everything that the Democrats promised us, as well as to establish contact with the Republicans, because it is with them that we will have to negotiate in the coming years to understand whether the United States will support Ukraine at the same pace and mode as before, or whether we should wait for a better fate. And I mean count on more weapons. Let's talk about this. Advisor to the President, Mykhailo Podolyak, is on the line. Mr. Mykhailo, I congratulate you. Congratulations, congratulations. But you see, I call it a twine in which the country is now, because we still need, not that we need, we would like to receive some gifts for the new year from the Joe Biden administration. And as the President said, we have received only 10% of what was promised. We want to keep or get those 90 before the new year, while Joe Biden is still President of the United States. And of course, you and I would like to understand what to expect from Donald Trump, because Trump has made a lot of statements since he ran for a second term. I suggest saving statements for the pre-election period, as being a presidential candidate comes with the rigors of the campaign. The campaign was extremely intense with this confrontation between Democrats and Republicans. And it's quite another thing when we have a president, President Trump, for one thing. And it would be important for us not to focus on all these conspiracy theories, all these conspiracy plans, all these statements, because everything will look a little different. Now we move on to understanding the twine or not twine. No, I think it's just a transformation of the political stage. It will look different, certainly under the Republicans than under the Democrats. It's obvious, because foreign policy periodically requires different views. And certainly Mr. Trump's administration will look at certain challenges that are currently facing the global political space differently. But once again, Ukraine has had institutional support from the Republican and Democratic parties, both at the level of leaders and at the collective level, and so on. And of course, more than that, Ukraine had communications, again in 2014, and especially during the full-scale invasion. This subjectivity grew significantly in Ukraine, and this allowed, first of all, to open much wider doors for communications. Secondly, to create additional platforms for these communications. And thirdly, the level of President Zelenskyy allows him to communicate on an equal footing with many leaders of other countries and directly convey a position that is not distorted or interpreted, but directly. Now, regarding the position of support for Ukraine, we expect that, of course, Mr. Biden's administration will adhere to the existing agreements and will finish its cadence accordingly, elegantly or correctly, and within the framework of this elegant end of the cadence, there is a need to put additional pressure on Russia in certain areas, meaning the economy, diplomacy, and so on, and at the same time, to significantly increase military support for Ukraine. Why? We are witnessing the globalization of the conflict, with countries like North Korea fighting alongside Russia. It was crucial for Ukraine's key ally, the United States, to respond, at least by providing more military support. As for how the new president will affect aid to Ukraine, I view it pragmatically.
Ситуація з новим президентом на допомогу Україні. І я на це дивлюсь прагматично. Дивіться, трошки дивно буде, якщо Російська Федерація, яка сьогодні претендує...
It would be odd if Russia, claiming illegal global leadership and seeking to reshape the world order, openly offers participation. In this redistribution of influence of such toxic countries as Iran or North Korea, and they will be allowed to dominate. I can't imagine that, for example, given Mr. Trump's psychotype, given that he talks about the need to return America to greatness, that is, to make America reputationally so powerful that the very word United States already causes horror, panic, and so on among potential aggressors. And he then says, let's lose the war to Russia. Why are we losing? Because there are alliances at war, not only Ukraine against Russia, but the alliance that Russia built, the alliance that Ukraine built with the United States, the United Kingdom, and so on at the beginning of the war. And so I honestly cannot imagine the United States saying, let's do this. Let's go to Russia's terms. Let's freeze the conflict on Russia's terms. Let's give Russia what it wants. Let's allow Russia to seize territories by force, dominate a number of countries, finally destroy the international law that we built, behave extremely aggressively, and invest even more money in expansion. Let them destroy a large European country, and then say that we are still great powerful leaders. If I were to switch to Mr. Trump's psychotype, I have very little idea how that would work. Let's be pragmatic. What can Russia offer the United States? The U.S. already dominates, deterring potential aggressors, leading technologically and financially, and maintaining strong ties with the EU to shape the most profitable global economic space.
Сполучені Штати домінують технологічно, фінансово. Сполучені Штати мають максимально тісні зв'язки з Європейським Союзом і таким чином формують максимально дохідний глобальний економічний простір.
Where you can get super yields and so on.
Супердоходність і так далі.
The United States dominates the world, international institutions, and international law. And what can Russia offer? Nothing. Provided that Russia stays where it is today, which is nowhere. In other words, it is reputationally losing all remaining influences from the Soviet Union transferred to the Russian Federation. And vice versa. If Russia, which has nothing to offer the world, no technology, no finances, except for corruption, let's be objective, and except for raw materials, the Russian Federation, through direct, large-scale online violence, gets a leading place at the global table. That is, you voluntarily say, yes, we have everything, they offer us nothing, but we will be with them as partners. Well, this is nonsense, and therefore we are calm. And I will summarize here again. We remain calm about pre-election statements and plans to end or freeze the conflict, which are being published by media, citing anonymous sources in Mr. Trump's circle. We're waiting for three things. First, the formation of Mr. Trump's administration, clarifying responsibilities for areas like national security, defense, foreign policy, finance, and justice. Secondly, let's wait for official, let's say, negotiations at various levels between the presidents, certainly the final communication between President Zelenskyy and President Trump, and further negotiations at various platforms, so that it can be objectified what is war, the nature of war, what are the consequences of a particular outcome, and also wait for the formation of think tanks in Mr. Biden's administration that will be able to give a much deeper understanding of this war. And finally, thirdly, let's wait for a real public official presentation of Mr. Biden's strategy in relation to Russia, to the war in Ukraine, to the conflicts in general that are gaining strength today with the help of the Russian Federation in various regions, and then we will be able to talk about the appropriate end of the war, about the appropriate legal, financial, and actual end of this war. I understand you're referring to the Wall Street Journal's article about Trump preparing a peace plan for Ukraine, allegedly involving a NATO rejection and a freeze on the front line. Ukraine may forgo NATO membership for 20 years and fix the front line without regaining occupied territories. The U.S. will continue supplying weapons, European countries to provide peacekeeping in the demilitarized zone. Again, Trump said that he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. But everyone understands that this is impossible on Russian territory. Again, they say that this is also impossible. However, I understand that Trump has not yet taken office because the inauguration is only on January 20th, so we still have to wait 24 hours. But this peace plan, how realistic can it be? How realistic can the proposed prospect of Ukraine's rejection of NATO and the freezing of the front line be? I think that, in principle, Russia will not agree to European countries maintaining peace in the demilitarized zone. You're right, it's strange to keep reading this, but it's not the first plan the media, including the Wall Street Journal and other outlets, have reported. They always claim to know everyone's plans. But let's be objective. Freezing the conflict is essentially ending the war. The Russian Federation, as we've said, hasn't resolved its issues. What issues?
Заморозка конфлікту – це точно про фінал війни? Дивіться, Російська Федерація, ми ж про це вже неодноразово казали, Російська Федерація не вирішила своїх питань взагалі.
That is, it manifestly kills a large number of people, manifestly wants to dominate Europe as a whole through violence, wants to do whatever it wants, and so on. But they have suffered huge reputational losses, to put it mildly. Zeroing out their military reputation, and above all, zeroing out Putin's personal reputation. They hate Ukraine with a passion, and look, they remain a military country with an authoritarian vertical. They did not fulfill their tasks. Moreover, they are not responsible for the consequences of the war. And even more so, they are not directly responsible for the facts. Hundreds of thousands of facts of war crimes or crimes against humanity against the civilian population. Moreover, they have rebuilt their economy. Yes, it has certain resource constraints today, but that's today. Tomorrow, everything may look a little different. Russia has restructured trade relations with various countries and is actively cooperating with the global South to fund its war. This is a country that hasn't solved its problems, remains militaristic, harbors hatred for Ukraine, and is unaccountable for its crimes. It won't attack the Baltics, Northern Europe, or interfere in places like Moldova or Georgia, nor finance terrorist networks. North Korea, for example, is in Moscow not for military experience, but to support Russia's war. Russia will no longer finance Hamas or other terrorist organizations or far-right parties in Europe. Again, that will provoke behavior in the streets of these cities. So, Russia will not do this. We have encouraged it to do this, but it will not do this. Why? The answer should be clear. Why Russia should not do this? Russia's goal is to capture all of Ukraine, including Odessa, control Transnistria, and dominate the Black Sea. After losing 43% of its fleet, it can't afford to appear weak, so it stays in position without expanding. Meanwhile, Ukraine, after 3 years of war and heavy losses, is losing security guarantees and becoming a gray country with people fleeing. We're promised weapons, but they aren't used, while Russia keeps provoking us. This is absolutely impossible. International law and territorial integrity are being leveled by Russia, and this leads to possible large-scale conflicts in the world. Russia is trying to take away what belongs to Ukraine, and there are territorial disputes in other regions that were once resolved.
Ну, тобто теракти, провокації, обстріли, таке інше, економічні блокади.
Ukraine, after 3 years of war and significant losses, is giving up all security guarantees, gradually becoming a gray country from which people are fleeing, which is certainly not desirable. Then we are told that we will receive weapons, but we do not use them, and Russia continues to provoke us.
Взяти борги, які нам заборгувала Російська Федерація, всі, і юридичні, і фізичні, і фактичні, і територіальні, і фінансові, і так далі. І тобто нам дають зброю, і ми її не використовуємо.
This is absolutely impossible. International law and territorial integrity are being leveled by Russia, and this leads to possible large-scale conflicts in the world. Russia is trying to take away what belongs to Ukraine.
Територіальної цілісності не існує. Якщо у вас буде сила, ви в будь-який момент можете забрати в будь-кого, будь-яку захочете землю. І так далі. Тобто ми починаємо масштабні конфлікти територіальні в різних частинах світу, тому що багато, то від нас не було з Росією ніяких...
And in other regions, there are territorial disputes that were once resolved.
Але в інших регіонах є спірні території, є конфлікти навколо цього, які сьогодні вдалося врегулювати.
Again, to freeze it on the basis of international law, which means that all of this will be scalable. I just don't understand where this 20-year period comes from, and what is a 20-year period supposed to solve? The question of Ukraine's existence. As I understand it, if Ukraine does not exist, there will be a burned territory, and then the question of joining or not joining NATO will no longer matter. However, I will move on to NATO's reputation. It is very important to understand this. Russia, which provoked NATO but did not fight it, realizes that at this stage of its military industry, it is not capable of fighting NATO. It understands that it needs to prepare accordingly, so it has been working on reformatting its equipment and weapons for 5 to 7 years. NATO has shown it's not ready to fight directly, only willing to pursue political settlements on the aggressor country's terms. What will you have in a certain time? That is, a country that cannot exist other than in a state of war. It makes no difference whether it is a cold war, a hot war, a cyber war, a provocative war, or a propaganda war. In any case, it will attack and provoke you, and you are not psychologically prepared. Unfortunately, Ukraine is psychologically ready to fight, but technologically, given the size of Russia, North Korea, and Iran, it is not ready. It is obvious. Resource-wise, you need to have allied support, and NATO, on the contrary, has everything it needs to zero in on the most aggressive military country. Psychologically, NATO is not ready for this personally, but it can help those who are ready to do it. They are not doing this to deal with another Russian army to invade in 5 to 7 years. There is no doubt why. Because you see, the Russian Federation today is a military country. It has rebuilt not only the economy, but also the social structure of its society. The key influencers are precisely the members of the so-called SVO. You have about 2 million, 3 million people who have either gone through the military and know nothing else to do but kill, or were part of the military as such. Where will the Russian Federation, which is not a technologically advanced country, take these people? What will it offer them? They will return to insignificant territories like Buryatia, where there's little to profit from, and behave lawfully. Accustomed to killing with impunity and amnesty, they'll continue living in peace after tasting the blood of another country. How will they come to realize this? And I'll tell you more. Bookmakers have started accepting bets on whether Trump will end the war in Ukraine in 3 months, whether Ukraine and Russia will announce a truce, and whether a ceasefire or a negotiated settlement of the war in Ukraine will be possible at any time.
В інтернетах почали приймати ставки на те, підтримає Дональд Трамп Україну, чи все ж таки там за 3 місяці буде тиснути на нас, щоб ми...
The Associated Press is writing this about Donald Trump's victory. And accordingly, the internet has already started accepting bets on whether Donald Trump will support Ukraine or whether in 3 months he will put pressure on us to reach some kind of truce with Russia. You said that we shouldn't listen to Donald Trump's election promises, because election promises and promises as president are slightly different things. And you know, I've talked to various experts who remember Trump's previous experience as president. So those who worked under Trump, who held positions, and they say that it's very ambiguous to listen or not to listen to what Trump is saying. If you think back to 1621, he said he would build a wall, and everyone said that this was a form of expression, but he ended up building the wall. He promised to evict migrants, and did. He vowed to tighten migration, and did. He declared an economic war with the EU and China, and followed through. But he failed to resolve issues in Serbia and Kosovo, hasn't settled Afghanistan, and his meeting with North Korea yielded no results. This raises doubts about trusting his words. It's not a question of listening. It's a matter of listening, of course, to understand at least the logic of certain explanations, but of listening. I don't know exactly what he means and how that logic is transformed as more data is obtained, but look, anything that relates to the strengthening of the United States, he does it directly. Especially anything related to domestic policy, anything related to, let's say, reputational losses of the United States. He will not do that, and it's obvious why, because his psychotype is built a little bit differently than other leaders. For example, European leaders, a number of European leaders. And I don't mean that in a bad or good way. No, it's just a different worldview in terms of he wants to dominate. Trump is a man who wants to dominate, who constantly has to prove his global leadership and his domestic leadership. In the domestic space, he wants to be, and was during his first term, a more effective manager in terms of regulating the accumulated domestic problems. And this is again domination, a program of personal domination in solving and pushing for solutions to certain problems, as well as global domination. Putin is demonstrating that he's willing to apply unlimited pressure to get what he wants, regardless of whether Russia deserves it, like returning to the G8 or being recognized as a major global power. He aims to prove that Russia is a superpower to be respected and accommodated in all matters, including international law. До якої мають не те, що дослухатись, а до якої мають ставитись з величезною повагою і йти на зустріч в будь-яких питаннях, навіть якщо... And it's a question of who's going to dominate, and then Putin comes in and there's someone like Trump who says, no, look, there are rules. We stand behind them. These are our rules. You either follow them or we will punish you for breaking these rules. And it's obvious why. Because there can't be a half dominance, or a quarter dominance, or a third dominance. I dominate here. I'm in charge. I'm the global leader. Let's give Putin what he wants, and other countries will follow suit. Everyone is watching to see if he'll be allowed to go unpunished, erase what democratic civilizations have built, and destroy international law as Putin aims to do.
Чи дозволять йому остаточно поховати міжнародне право як таке і щось там нове будувати. І Путін про це говорить. І всі цього очікують. Дивіться,
North Korea's presence in the European theater is a completely new reality, and not everyone in Europe fully grasps it. Putin is constructing this reality, saying, I can afford this. I'll do whatever it takes. If there's no response to North Korea, he may push for Assad's troops or others from Syria to join the war against Ukraine in Europe. The concept of domination through violence. I can't imagine that Trump can say, look, I'm cool here. I'm cool in the domestic market. We're working with migrants here. We're working with economic problems. We're working with the domestic national debt. We're not here. We're giving everything away. And then what? And then you lose, once again, economic, technological, financial, moral, diplomatic dominance in the world. Why does the United States need this? Nothing. And the president of Ukraine spoke with Donald Trump on the phone and congratulated him on his re-election as the 47th president of the United States. Putin did not call, did not send a telegram. Peskov said he did not know whether Putin would do so. Then he reminded us that the United States is generally an unfriendly country for them. He then questioned if relations between Russia and the U.S. could get any worse. Before the election, they loudly claimed Trump would restore order, but now they seem uncertain about what to expect from him. They're now hoping Kamala Harris wins by a small margin.
І тепер вони вже схиляються більше до того, що в принципі їм би було непогано, якби там, не знаю, в цих виборах перемогла би Камала Гарріс з якимось дуже маленьким відривом.
And then there would be a recount, judicial procedures, which could lead to a certain chaos in the United States, which would not allow us to support Ukraine in the format that we have now.
Підтримувати Україну в тому форматі, як є зараз навіть.
It's obvious Russia's strategy is always instability, chaos, as you say, in domestic markets, political markets. We see this in post-Soviet countries like Moldova and Georgia, where tension is constantly maintained. It would be ideal for them if this didn't fully unfold in Moldova's presidential elections. But this can be realized in the parliamentary elections. Why? Because unfortunately, pro-Russian parties, pro-Russian associations, and pro-Russian media continue to operate in Moldova and so on. The Russian influence, networked, is quite significant. So the key for Russia is certainly the constant instability in certain countries, conflict during election campaigns, and the unwillingness of some to recognize the elections of others. The United States, with Biden and Harris, has promised a conflict-free transfer of power, which is great for democracy, especially given the intensity of the campaign and opposing views. Russia is clearly disappointed, primarily because there's no chaos in the U.S. and because it has a stable democracy that can handle its issues effectively.
Росія розчарована. Перше, розчарована тим, що немає хаосу в Сполучених Штатів. Розчарована тим, що там є стала демократія, яка вміє зі своїми викликами.
Thirdly, they don't understand that the statements made before the election will be seen differently once Trump becomes president. He will analyze everything more deeply, including Russia's relations with China, the global South, and the Ukraine war. Based on Trump's pragmatic, business-driven approach, his decisions may differ greatly from what Russia expected, and they will. I'll say this right away. Giving Russia something they don't deserve is nonsense. As for Trump, from Russia's perspective, they are clearly confused. They will continue waiting for the new administration to form and clarify who is responsible for what areas and what priorities will be set.
Тому повертаємось до пана Трампа з точки зору російського сприйняття. Ну вони сьогодні розгублені, це очевидно. Вони очікують і будуть очікувати до моменту, поки не буде сформовано ще раз.
And when they see the first public official statements from these representatives, by direction, by industry, and accordingly from Mr. Trump personally. But I want to disappoint the Russian Federation. No one, I emphasize, not Europe, although yesterday, you remember, before the full-scale invasion, there were many countries, especially in the conservative part of Central Europe, that continued to insist, I will not name the German chancellor at that time. They claimed Russia would seek friendly relations and focus on business, not expansion. But by then, Russia had already seized Crimea, fought in Georgia, secured a foothold in Ukraine, controlled parts of Moldova, and provoked Estonia. Clearly, they weren't just playing around. Expansion was always their goal.
Вони вже мали плацдарм в Україні, вони досі контролюють плацдарм у Молдові, вони постійно ображають Естонію, там провокують її і тому подібне. Ну точно вони не були зацікавлені в.
But today we see a reformatting of relations with Russia on the part of European countries, including those that supported the Russian Federation. And we can definitely expect a tougher behavior of the United States towards Russia. And they subconsciously understand this somewhere, but they continue to play this game, scaling up their expectations, their rosy expectations that there is someone in this world for us. For the Russian Federation, let me emphasize that almost everyone, including neutral countries, recognizes how destructive its strategy, tactics, and behavior are today. While there have always been small regional conflicts, Russia politically and legally allowed them to exist and plan.
Але ці конфлікти були маленькі регіональні, ще раз підкреслю. Російська ж Федерація політичний, юридичний каркас.
Everyone realizes this. You just know when you realize it, but on the other hand, you realize that you can make a lot of money, speculatively, on Russia today. Unfortunately, you choose to make it situationally. But generally speaking, everyone practically understands that for sustainable, stable relations in the global political process, the Russian Federation has to go away. I don't know where. That is, it definitely cannot exist politically in this form. I was going to ask about this, but I see in the Wall Street Journal that Trump is proposing a peace plan for Ukraine. It says the U.S. will continue supplying weapons to deter a Russian re-attack, while Russia and Ukraine would agree to a 1,200-kilometer demilitarized zone.
Можливий повторний наступ РФ, і згідно з цим планом Росія і Україна мають погодитися на демілітаризовану зону понад 1200 кілометрів.
Again, the part of the Kursk region that is now under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces is interesting, as it is included in these 1,200 kilometers, or not taken into account. That is, whether the Kursk region will be a demilitarized zone in this case. But about money, again, we're talking about the fact that Donald Trump, he's a businessman to the bone, and if you look at the last, 2.5 years, you can see that Rheinmetall, that German concern, is opening weapons plants in Ukraine.
Вкладається в українську оборонну промисловість. Це явно не для того, щоб це все було захоплено Росією.
That is, Germany understands that it is investing in the Ukrainian defense industry, and it is clearly not to have it all taken over by Russia, to hand it over to Russia. But we have not seen American weapons plants in Ukraine, for example. What can we make America interested in? We talked about how Russia can interest America, how we can interest Donald Trump.
Суб'єктність як таку, в тому числі через пояснення, в чому ми компетентні.
This is a difficult question, as we had to define our role by showing what we can offer the world, politically and economically. The president of Ukraine is trying to explain that Ukraine has valuable experience in a large war, understanding how weapons work in real combat, not just in theory.
І ми, в принципі, сьогодні синхронізували зброю різних виробників різних країн. Якщо тут хтось працює, наприклад, в Україну інвестує.
Today, we have synchronized weapons from different manufacturers, making investments in Ukraine more effective than theoretical models. Ukraine is open to such investments. The U.S. has long been the dominant arms market, far ahead of Russia.
Сполучені Штати вважались і вважаються домінуючими на ринку зброї. Вони там з великим відривом від тої ж Росії сьогодні існують, і безумовно вони налаштовані на те, щоб це і залишалось в такому вигляді, навпаки.
And aims to maintain that lead, which will only grow. Once again, this war has shown that Russian weapons are much less effective than those offered by NATO countries, and especially the United States. The question is not what we can offer. We can certainly offer it if this market were not under the blow of war. As such, the purchasing power would not have fallen.
на жаль, це об'єктивно, це наслідки війни як такої. Ми могли б презентувати країну з великим
Unfortunately, due to the war, we can no longer present Ukraine as a large consumer market of 35 to 40 million people. However, Ukraine can rebuild and reformat its economy, with the military sector as a separate cluster. Many countries would be interested in this, especially considering Ukraine's experience.
З урахуванням досвіду України. Але це треба все ж таки правильно фіналізувати війну, перше. Друге, це треба правильно проводити переговори на різних майданчиках.
But it is still necessary to finalize the war correctly. First, second, it is necessary to conduct negotiations on various platforms. And President Zelenskyy is doing just that. He is currently holding talks in parallel with European armed companies, with American companies, including armed ones. But at the same time, he is conducting effective negotiations at the level of the president, or in this case, President Trump. That is, he wants to explain, look, Ukraine is promising for you. Ukraine can really be such an alliance not just as part of the Ramstein Club, but as an ally on whose territory you can. And then there can be various options, or vice versa. Ukraine can participate in terms of military experience in such and such companies. Well, in this case, remember point 5 of the Victory Plan, which clearly states that Ukraine is competent in the post-war period, and Ukraine offers this. The president of Ukraine is not only engaging on various platforms, but also seeking competencies that can strengthen relations with partners, especially the United States. Additionally, Ukraine remains a key sense-maker in global media on war and peace, demonstrating resilience despite fears of the Russian Federation. Despite the fact that everyone was sure, even analysts, that Russian military capabilities are so powerful that no European country, I emphasize, no country, especially not Ukraine, will survive even 2 weeks. It's just a powerful tank that will break everyone quickly enough. 3 years of war. Ukraine has already created a phenomenon that is informational and that affects, on the one hand, our reputational ability to negotiate. It's a completely different level of negotiations. The second component is the recognition by partners and investors that investing in Ukraine will yield results. About military component. We can talk about this separately, but we are talking about the military component, which would be of interest to the United States as well. President Zelenskyy has arrived in Hungary for his first visit since the Russian invasion, meeting Prime Minister Orban. Orban previously visited Ukraine for the European Political Community Summit, which starts today.
Там сьогодні розпочинається саміт Європейської політичної спільноти. Також була інформація про те, що
There was also information that we are preparing a document that should minimize our different positions with Hungary on certain issues. Again, can this be seen as an improvement in our relations with Hungary, or does it say nothing, and Hungary is just a place where the European political community meets? It says a lot.
Це говорить про багато чого. Дивіться, дійсно, в нас є розуміння, що Угорщина, попри все...
Hungary and Slovakia have their own positions on war, peace, and European integration. But as European countries, they still have an interest in boosting Europe's profitability, which directly impacts their own economies.
Але між тим це все ж таки європейські країни. Вони все рівно зацікавлені в тому, щоб Європа підвищувала свою доходність, тому що від цього залежить і доходність цих країн.
In addition, we have bilateral relations.
Там є багато накопичених проблематик, які потребують вирішення.
And they include many accumulated problems that need to be addressed. This is very important, and by the way, this was the case with Slovakia. Slovakia actively supports Ukraine's European integration intentions and does not oppose them, to put it mildly. On the contrary, Slovakia is interested in Ukraine becoming an integral part of the European economic space with its market. It is also necessary to engage in dialogue and negotiations with Hungary. Moreover, to return to the beginning of our conversation, under Mr. Trump's presidency, the global political space will undoubtedly be reformatted. Orban will likely have to navigate this new political landscape, and we will see the emphasis in his public foreign policy stance change. Why is Russia attractive to some countries? Because it provides an opportunity to make money, but strategically, it is a country that leads to fatal consequences. Mr. Orban is pragmatic, seeking additional opportunities for Hungary, including financial ones. While we'd prefer moral imperatives guide actions, the global political process often doesn't work that way. Ultimately, it's significant that Orban invited Zelenskyy to participate in the European community, despite Hungary holding the EU presidency.
Тому підсумовуючи, дивіться, важливо сам факт запрошення паном Орбаном пана Зеленського до участі в Будапешті.
Bilateral talks at the presidential and prime ministerial levels are crucial to clarify positions and debunk speculation. This helps correct misunderstandings and presents new approaches. Additionally, the global political landscape is evolving, and Hungary may adjust its stance on certain issues.
Спекулятивності двосторонні відносини. Тому що ти відповідно розмовляєш, ти відповідно даєш свою позицію. Людина, якщо хтось там з оточення приносить якісь конспірологічні теорії, тоді
For us, it is important that there are no bilateral conflict issues that can be resolved through discussions between countries. Such issues should not relate to more global issues, such as NATO, the EU, financing, etc. Therefore, these are very optimistic signals that should be taken correctly. Regarding recent events, there have been attacks in the Caspian Sea recently, when kamikaze drones hit enemy ships. This is an important new achievement for us and also a demonstration of our capabilities for our partners. If we had used much more advanced technology rather than kamikaze drones, the result would have been even better. As for the next few months, we expect some surprises and gifts from Joe Biden.
Показова робота для наших партнерів того, що ми вміємо, можемо це робити. І, звісно, якби це були не дрони камікадзе, а якісь далекобійні ракети, було б набагато краще.
Until now, he could not act openly without affecting Kamala Harris's rating. Now, with 2 months left in his term, he has his hands free. He can invite Ukraine to join NATO, provide long-range missiles, and authorize strikes on Russian territory.
Рейтинг Камали Гарріс зараз вже не залежить ні рейтинг, ні хто стане наступним президентом, ні від чого не залежить. 2 місяці розв'язані руки. Можна запрошувати Україну до НАТО, можна давати далекобійні ракети.
This is the last chance to go down in history as a president who took decisive steps. Will Joe Biden take advantage of this opportunity?
Чи буде це робити Джо Байден?
I'm not ready to say what Mr. Biden will do or not do. It's a matter of, paradoxically, an internal party consensus in the Democratic Party. What they want to have as a beginning, a start, for other political debates, that is, for other political cycles, what achievement they want to come out with.
З яким здобутком вони хочуть вийти, мається на увазі вийти з каденції пана Байдена, і з чого вони почнуть далі свою політичну програму. Мені здається, ви абсолютно
To move beyond Mr. Biden's term and start a new political agenda, tough decisions should be made and communicated clearly. It's crucial to explain why a more aggressive stance toward Russia is needed and why Ukraine must be allowed to fight within international law. The war should shift to Russian territory, as this is essential for progress.
Війна має бути перенесена на територію Російської Федерації. У мене немає в цьому сумнівів, тому що це тільки єдиний інструмент, який, по-перше, буде суттєво...
I have no doubt this is the only way to influence Russian public sentiment and reduce Russia's resources, increasing the war's cost. Whether such decisions will be made depends on where the Democratic Party wants to position itself in future elections.
Чи зможе він такі рішення прийняти? Ще раз, це питання в тому, з яких позицій хоче демократична партія стартувати до вже в наступних електоральних циклах, на що вона буде робити ставку, як вона буде...
The focus will be on how the Democratic Party characterizes Biden's presidency, both historically and pragmatically. Ukraine needs to continue its work, avoiding sudden moves, and maintain cooperation with both the Democratic and Republican parties for institutional support, which Ukraine is already doing.
Дивіться, для України важливо продовжувати працювати з представниками демократичної партії, з представниками республіканської партії, незалежно ні від чого, тому що це інституціональна підтримка Україні. Що Україна, до речі, робить?
We must keep explaining why investing in Ukraine's victory is crucial for the U.S., ensuring global stability and improving reputations for the U.S., Europe, and Ukraine. Removing Russia from the world map would deter other aggressors. But will these pragmatic decisions be made?
Тому що це абсолютно точно обнулить бажання інших потенційних агресорів себе відповідним чином вести. Але чи будуть вони приймати ці прагматичні рішення? Можливо,
The issue is not about Ms. Biden, but about his team's analytical capacity, whether they're ready to assess the war's stage, its consequences, and the impact of transferring power to a Republican administration. If they analyze this and communicate with Ukraine, we could expect 3 key decisions.
Вони будуть стартувати у наступних електоральних циклах і тому подібне. Якщо вони це проаналізують в достатньому обсязі, якщо вони проведуть певні комунікації, в тому числі з українською стороною, то тоді, відповідно, можна було б очікувати прийняття.
This means a significant increase in military support. We need to do more, starting with the budget passed in Congress, which includes a much larger supply of shells, missiles, and anti-missiles. Second, we must publicly affirm Ukraine's right to fight within international law, meaning strikes on Russian territory with any weapon are essential. Third, Ukraine needs the proper tools, including long-range weapons that have not yet been provided. With these, the current stage of the war, where Russia still has a resource advantage, will end, leading to a new phase of the conflict.
Тоді ми будемо бачити зовсім іншу, скажімо так, завершиться